Hello, this is Barry Nirmal. Please subscribe to my channel by clicking on the subscribe link below. Hello friends, in this video I will tell you the story of Kim Philby, who was a double agent. He was a top Soviet spy and he also was a spy for Britain. Englishman Kim Philby was born in an aristocratic family in 1912 and died in Moscow in 1988. He worked for Britain's Secret Intelligence Service, or SIS, and for 10 years was head of the department devoted to countering Soviet espionage. Little did the British know that he was also Moscow's most important spy in London. For many years, Kim Philby had worked for the USSR, heading a cell of Soviet spies in London. At the same time, he was in charge of the department devoted to countering communism at the British Secret Intelligence Service, or SIS. In other words, his job was to catch people like himself, a predicament fraught with great danger. Ever the upper-class Englishman, Mr. Philby was adored by his colleagues for his suave ways and always being the life of the party. He was also a womanizer, as most spies are. That is until it emerged that he was a Soviet spy, earning him the title of, quote, Britain's greatest traitor, unquote. He was a devoted communist born in upper-class British family. His real name was Harold Philby, and Kim was his nickname. He was born into an affluent family. His father, St. John Philby, worked in British India, later converted to Islam, and was advisor to King Ibn Saud of Saudi Arabia. Such are the ironies of fate. St. John persuaded the Saudis to cooperate with Britain and the USA instead of the USSR, while his own son ended up working for Moscow for 30 years. Young Philby received a first-class education at Cambridge. While there, he associated with the British socialists, something he later addressed by saying, quote, when I was 19-year-old undergraduate trying to form my own opinion about life, I had a good look around and I reached a simple conclusion. The rich had had it too damn good for too long, and the poor had had it too damn bad, and it was time that it all changed, unquote. The Cambridge Five was a ring of spies in the United Kingdom that passed information to the Soviet Union during the Second World War and the Cold War, and was active from the 1930s until at least the early 1950s. None of the known members were ever persecuted for spying. The general public first became aware of the conspiracy in 1951 after the sudden flight of Donald Maclean and Guy Burgess to the Soviet Union. Then suspicion immediately fell on Kim Philby, who eventually fled to the Soviet Union in 1963. Following Philby's flight, British intelligence obtained confessions from Anthony Blunt and then John Cairncross. The group were recruited by the NKVD, which was the predecessor of KGB, during their education at the University of Cambridge in the 1930s. After graduating from Cambridge, Philby started working with groups that provided relief to victims of fascism in Germany, and the experience would change him forever. While helping refugees in Vienna, Kim Philby fell in love with a woman named Litzy Friedman. and she was unlike anyone he had met before. From the moment he laid eyes on her, Philby suddenly found himself on the path that would finally end with his flight in 1963 to a dull and dreary apartment in Moscow, drinking vodka. Friedman was a frank person, and she instantly made an impression on Philby. Right when they met, she abruptly asked him how much money he had on him. He replied, £100. Hopefully enough to keep him going for a year in Vienna. Friedman did some quick math in her head and concluded that he only needed £75. That would leave £25, which Friedman told him to donate to the International Organization for Aid for Revolutionaries. Philby was too much impressed with the zeal and dedication of this charming lady and left that encounter with £75. And suddenly he fell in deep love with this young, fiery revolutionary whom he soon married. The desire to bring equality to the world led him to work for the main citadel of the left at that time, Soviet Union. In 1933, Philby was recruited in Vienna by Arnold Deutsch, a deep-cover Soviet intelligence agent. Later, when accused of betrayal, Philby always calmly retorted that he remained true to his own convictions and that this was more important than loyalty to his country. He said he never felt that he belonged to Britain, and thus he was not a traitor. Arnold Deutsch convinced Philby that as a secret agent inside British counterintelligence, he would do far more good for the communist cause than any devoted socialist could. And beginning in the 1930s, Kim began to conceal his political beliefs as a correspondent for the Times. He sent a report from fascist Spain and publicly praised General Franco. Gradually, Philby's international experience had led to the SIS taking up interest in the journalist and offering him a job. Philby agreed. While in Spain, he was asked by the Soviets to spy on the movements of Franco and to kill him. But another agent informed the Soviets that Philby lacked the courage to be a killer, though he was a very smart man. Of course, Franco survived and lived until the 1970s. After the outbreak of World War II in 1939, Philby became an indispensable agent for Soviet intelligence. Thanks to the decryption of the Enigma code, the British managed to read secret German radio messages throughout the war. And while Winston Churchill was in no hurry to share all this information with his Soviet allies, his man, Kim Philby, had been secretly doing that job for him. Philby told a seminar for East German intelligence officers in 1981, quote, "You have probably all heard stories that SIS is an organization of mythical efficiency, a very, very dangerous thing indeed. Well, during the Second World War, it honestly was not," unquote. Every day, that is, Philby had left the office with a big briefcase full of latest papers and reports and handed them to his contact, who photographed them overnight and sent them to Moscow. While next morning, Philby would put the originals back in their place with no one ever knowing. This went on for a long time. Anyway, the Battle of Kursk in 1943 between Soviet Union and Germans, which was a tank battle, was among those operations where Philby's information was very essential for the USSR. Thanks to him, the USSR knew exactly where the Third Reich was planning to deliver the decisive blow near the village of Prokhorovka and held back a powerful attack by German tanks, which later made it possible for Soviet to win the battle. Sergei Ivanov, head of the press service of the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service told RIA Novotny, quote, when Philby was asked what his main achievement of life had been, he would repeatedly say, Prokhorovska. Anyway, Philby was also important. He notified Stalin that Japan did not intend to attack the USSR. This allowed Stalin to move his troops from the eastern border with Japan to the Western Front to confront the Nazi, the soldiers who had come very close to Moscow. And then this is how Stalin drove back the Germans out of the USSR. From 1944, he managed to get his own boss in SIS ousted with the use of clever manipulation. Later he said, quote, it was a very dirty story, but our work does imply getting our hands dirty from time to time, unquote. Then Kim Philby was put in charge of SIS Section 9, which oversaw anti-communist operations. In his new position, he continued to pass information to Moscow, but he skillfully covered his tracks. So much so that in 1946, he received the Order of the British Empire from King George VI. Right from King George, he received the Order of the British Empire. Anyway, Philby, however, was skating on thin ice all the time. On one occasion in 1945, the Soviet Vice Consul in Turkey, Konstantin Volkov, told the British that in exchange for political asylum and money, he was prepared to reveal the names of 3 important Soviet agents in London. Philby, being one of them, flew to a meeting with Volkov as SIS representative, having sent a tip-off to Moscow. Volkov was arrested, with Philby telling his SIS bosses that the meeting must have been a provocation. Anyway, Guy Burgess, who fled to the Soviet Union in the early 1950s, seriously let Philby down. They were both friends. In 1951, the clouds were gathering over Philby again, following the escape to Moscow of 2 Soviet spies who had been recruited on his recommendation, Donald Maclean and Guy Burgess. Maclean was already on the verge of being exposed, but Burgess, who had organized Maclean's escape, fled without permission, deeply compromising Philby's position. The SIS was aware that Philby and Burgess knew each other and decided it was quite possible that Philby was the third man. He underwent questioning. The Soviet agent kept his nerve. The British subjected him to weeks of daily interrogation, but could not spot one lie. In the end, he was left alone, although he was removed as head of the department and officially cleared by the Foreign Secretary personally. And in 1955, Philby convened a news conference at the home of his mom, in which he expressed his outrage at being accused of espionage. Quote, he said, quote, the last time I spoke to a communist, knowing that he was a communist, was sometime in 1934. And the nation believed. What a lie, but the nation believed. In the years 1956 to 1963, Philby worked in the Middle East ostensibly as a journalist, but in reality as an SIS agent, and of course Moscow's too. Not much is known about this period of his life. In 1963, however, he was finally exposed thanks to testimonies provided by the new defectors to the West, as well as by an old girlfriend who revealed his communist beliefs. An offer of immunity, quote, was contingent on my telling all I knew about the KGB and naming names in Britain, unquote. Philby was to recall later, but his Soviet comrades organized his escape from Beirut to Moscow. He traveled on a Soviet freighter. Some people think that the British intentionally let Philby flee to the east to avoid a scandal scandalous trial. In the USSR, Philby essentially became an honorary pensioner. He passed on to the Soviet intelligence everything he had and occasionally gave seminars for intelligence officers. He lived in a flat in central Moscow and the Soviets arranged his marriage to a Muscovite, 20 years his junior. In the few interviews he gave, he said he regretted nothing, but he did admit that he did miss Britain a little. He did miss marmalade, English marmalade, the Scotch whiskey, and chocolates, British chocolates. According to some intelligence officers, many of the things Philby had been involved in are still classified and may remain shrouded in mystery forever. Such are the stories of spies. Okay, so I hope you find this story interesting. And thank you very much. Please like this video, subscribe to my channel, and spread the word about this video to all your friends. Thanks again.